Good morning, everybody. Greetings from Kansas City. I'm excited. Thanks for joining us in your morning. For me, it's morning here as well, of course. We are normally with my wife and my daughter. We are out doing our errands, our grocery shopping, our fun things in the morning. But I'm excited that I'm honored that Aunt Esteban has given me the opportunity to come speak to you guys this morning, as well as I'm honored that you guys have chosen to join us and listen and come hang out and talk about telling our story of the Church of the Nazarene, which is something that I'm really passionate about. As Esteban had said, I work here at the Global Ministry Center for the Church of the Nazarene in Kansas City. I'm the digital content manager, and I mainly manage the Nazarene News email newsletter that comes out every Friday in both English and Spanish. I'm really excited to get a chance to hang out with you guys this morning and chat about stories. I'm going to try and get my screen here set up to share. Screen. Esteban, if you don't mind. Oh, there we go. I clicked on the wrong thing. All right. So this morning, we just want to talk about how to tell your story and identifying some of the stories that in your area that you will want to share, how to share them, and why it's important that you do share them. Briefly, let me tell you a little bit about myself and my story. I grew up in California and made my way to the Midwest of the United States somehow, usually thanks to that pretty lady there on the right in the photo that you'll see. My wife is from Kansas City, and it's kind of how we ended up out here. I attended Olivet Nazarene University in Bourbonnais, Illinois, which is just about an hour south of Chicago. I worked at a Nazarene summer camp, which is where my wife Bethany and I met. If you haven't told by now, I am a Nazarene through and through. My father even pastored for a few years before I was born. So we have always been Nazarene through and through. And I think that's some of where my passion for telling the story of our denomination comes from. I wasn't always confident in a call to the church. I wasn't quite sure what that looked like. I felt called to the church, but everywhere I'm ever told is, okay, you're going to be a pastor, you're going to be a missionary. And I was like, I don't think those things really feel like what I'm called to. So I took a step back and had always really kind of enjoyed writing and being creative. And I love sports. I love soccer and football, especially. And the opportunity to write about them, those things came up kind of as a side thing. A side hustle, a side gig, if you will, at a very small website called Last Word on Soccer. And my friends there, my editors, my coworkers really pushed me to get into taking writing incredibly serious and going in and really turning it towards true journalism and not just spouting my opinions, which are at the time were probably largely uninformed anyways. So I started to write for them. And as I got to this crossroads of, do I continue studying ministry to be a pastor, which I don't feel called to pastor a church? Why would I do that? And then the question being posed of, where do I go in my life here with this at this crossroads? The opportunity for the Copa America in 2016 was held here in the United States. And because I'm from California, the opening game of that tournament was about an hour from my hometown on my birthday. And so my editors had said, if you really want to do this, give it a shot, apply, see what happens and see what doors open up. So I did. And I put a shot in the dark, and I basically prayed that if God willed this to go be my direction that I take in my life, would you open the door? And if not, please shut it as hard as you can in my face. So a couple of days later, an email after I sent in the application came across my phone. As you see, they pop up, the little push notifications came across that said credential application approved June 3rd, 2016, USA versus Colombia. And it was a start to the dream. I got my first experience in there. And I said, wow, this is something I absolutely want to do. So I changed my studying track, went to study journalism and learn how to tell stories, learn how to inform people, learn how to report, but also at the same time, that's a very hard career path to get into. So when I got finished and my wife and I got married, I had to work to stay in Kansas City. I had to work a lot of odd jobs, and not truly odd jobs, but working in grocery stores, working in restaurants, and only taking part-time hours and part-time minutes at work because I needed to have the flexibility to try and write about the soccer things that were happening in Kansas City. And so at the same time, God had really started working in me, and started putting a passion for telling the stories of what our denomination is doing. And I felt like, we hear them every time a missionary, especially in America, we hear them every time a missionary comes to our church, but that's it. I mean, it is a missionary that comes to our church. Maybe we go to a conference and there's a video, but no one is sharing these testimonies. We have however many million of people in our denomination. There has to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of incredible stories of what God is doing in his people. Why are we not hearing enough of that? And so at that same time in my life, my wife became pregnant. We had some issues with the pregnancy that really necessitated me kind of potentially giving up on the soccer writing dream and the sports writing dream and saying, okay, I've got to go find something. If it is working for package services, if it's working in a factory, whatever gets me as many hours and as much money as I can right now, because this is going to be really tight because she had been put on bed rest and was not allowed to work. So income was reduced, and we put it in God's hands. And somehow the very next day, after we had a very long prayer session with the Lord about this, someone messaged me and said, the Church of the Nazarene is looking for a news writer. This is totally up your alley. And I said, wow, wonderful timing. Thanks, Jesus. Thanks, God. So that was in 2019 when I applied and interviewed and accepted this job. And for the last 3 years, I've had the pleasure of sharing countless stories every single year about the impact that God has had on people around the world through the Church of the Nazarene, and the great things that you guys are doing, especially on your region, but that's multiplied across all 6 regions, the USA and Canada, Mesoamerica, South America, Asia Pacific, Africa, and Eurasia. God is doing incredible things, and I've had the opportunity to share a lot of these stories. So, I think, Esteban gave me 15, or wouldn't say 15, gave me 2 hours to talk today. I hope I get close to that, but at the same time, we'll see how it goes. I will do my best to be respectful of your time as well. We won't go over that, but I've got a lot of stuff that I've learned over the last few years of doing this, and a lot of stuff that I've learned even in times prior to that, that I'm really excited to share with you all. And so I want to open us up first. As we get started, I would love for us to take a look at this passage here in John chapter 4. I have it in both, Esteban. Now, if the translation on the bottom of the screen there is bad, gripe at Esteban, because he's the one who sent me the translation for that one.
Can you send me the presentation so I can change the view of the presentation? Is that okay? You can send it to me.
Yeah, I could set right now.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
Yes, it's because we're seeing the presenter view. We need to see another
oh,
view. Yeah,
here, let me do this then. Is that better?
it's better. Yeah, that's
Okay,
perfect. Thank you.
there we go. Sorry about that, guys. As you can, my note is, trust me, I have notes. They're here. I just don't, if you're looking at the presenter view and you didn't see any notes, then my apologies, folks. So yes, I'll go back to this really quick. Obviously, you see the picture, there's me on the left. In the middle is my beautiful daughter. Her name is Wesley Ray. She is going to be 3 years old in October, which is absolutely insane. She grows so fast. And she has put us on a whole lot of adventures. And then there's my lovely wife, Bethany, there on the right. We have been married for 6 years as of 2 weeks ago. So it's been a great early time in our life. I'm still a baby. I'm still relatively young. If Esteban likes to share his age, mine is 28. So there's my age for you. So let's take a look at this passage here. In John chapter 4, this is going to be verse 39 through 42. Like I said, if that's the Spanish translation there is bad on the bottom, blame Esteban. But so let's take a look at it here. Many of the Samaritans from that town, I'm going to come back and give you context here, right? We've heard this story. This is the part of the parable of the woman at the well, right? Where Jesus has the conversation with the woman. And she asks him, why would you, a Jew, talk to me, a Samaritan? He goes on and tells her everything about her life. She believes in the Messiah after this conversation. She goes back to the town and leaves as the disciples come. In verse 39, where we'll start, it picks back up in talking about what happened in that city. So verse 39, I'll read this in English. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. Verse 42 is my favorite verse of this passage. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the Lord. So if you don't mind, I'll before we really jump into this too, I'll if I pray here and get us started off on the right foot this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for all of these people who have taken time out of their Saturday morning. These people clearly are passionate about the church, are passionate about their ministries, and are passionate about their the stories that they have that are going on in their world and in their context. Lord, I ask that this training would reach those who it needs to reach, and that you would speak to people through this. I ask that you would speak to them through me, and let my words and let what I say reflect what you want for these people to hear. I thank you for this time, Lord. I thank you for all the great things that you have done, will do, and continue to do. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. So I want you to think about this. How can you tell people your stories? What is your story? And then as we get started here, what is the story? What is the story? We're talking specifically about what kind of information do you have? When you have news, you have information. What is it? How do we kind of parse this and make this a digestible story, or something that can be shared with people outside of those couple of people who have the initial information? So there's a couple of types of stories that we do here with Nazarene News, and this is kind of stories that I would also say translate very well into the soccer world, as I do work for the Kansas City Star, which is the main newspaper out here, doing soccer coverage for the two professional soccer teams here, Sporting in Kansas City, and in the NWSL, the women's league here in America, the Kansas City Current. A lot of these types of news these three things that we'll talk about here are very translatable across all of those, all of these mediums, and how we share stories, how we share them, how and where we share them. We'll talk about that as well. So in this first part, we're going to talk specifically about what would we call a press release or just basic news. And when I say basic news, we're talking this person did this on this day at this time, and a little bit of description explaining that, and that's it. There's no more extra context. There's no anything. You're just strictly delivering that news, which is where some of these things would be considered press releases, as in we are just trying to get this basic information out. Context can come later, but we need to inform you of what has happened. So that's going to be, in your context, that's going to be things like announcements. Do you have an event that's coming? Are there leadership changes? I know for me here, a lot of the announcements that I do are district superintendents and FSC type announcements. Occasionally, we have to put out press releases for General Assembly. If you've seen any of the articles that have come across on the Church of the Nazarene's official Facebook page and Instagram and Twitter account and stuff like that, those are all press releases that are talking about General Assembly is coming. We are informing you of what the theme is, who is speaking what night. We're informing you about the Love Your Neighbor project. On top of that, so those types of things are worked into this as well with events. For your local context, do you have a camp that you are coming up that you want to advertise? I mean, these are essentially news press releases that you can control within your own church, in your own context, and saying these come out in the bulletin. I don't know if you guys do bulletins much anymore. We have a digital bulletin at our church here in KC that gets sent out via, it's essentially a newsletter that has all that information and little pictures and stuff like that. All of those things kind of count as this, what we would call a press release. In its basic form, that's what it is. We're talking basic information. Did someone in your congregation die? Did someone that is close to your ministry, close to your people's hearts, pass away? That's also an announcement, press release, something that you would try to inform people. And then I have on here general information. These are things that you're just trying to get basic information out. My church is going to be closed. Our ministry is going to be happening. Our ministry is going to be at this place at this time, and we will be handing out these things. Or we need to bring in, let's say you're a compassion ministry and you're looking for donations. Do you need a donation of food? Do you need a donation of clothing? Are you guys fundraising? Those types of things. All of those are under what we would consider basic news or press release. And there's not really much to them beyond the basic information that comes out. These stories are usually short when I write them and when we put them out. These stories are usually, I mean, the whole goal, as I said, is just to strictly inform people. The next one that we'll talk about here is going to be news stories. Now, what's the difference between news stories and a news article or just basic news? And I think for me, the key to think of here is the stories part, right? When you are just trying to simply inform people, that's it. You want to tell them this happened, and then you're kind of leaving it on the reader or the consumer to draw their own conclusions, draw their own context out of it. And it kind of at sometimes can leave people hanging. So there's the difference too in the world of media, right? The people who have the news are what's going to send out the press release. Me, the writer, I am going to be writing a news story on that. So it's my job to inform people about what this news is. So that is where we start to provide further context, further information. But because in your context, you're likely going to be doing, and in your ministry context, you're likely going to be doing both of these things. I think it's important that we understand the difference between what is just a news blast or a press release versus what is a real story, something that is going to have a little bit more substance to it, that explains why you're doing that. So obviously the first point here is that it goes further in depth. These are instead of saying this event took place at a certain time, this many people came, this many people were saved, these dignitaries attended and spoke, if it's a camp, you're kind of diving beyond that. How were people impacted? Why did this happen? As I said, the second line here is it begins to answer the question of why. Because as a reader, you give the way a news article is structured, or usually when you're delivering news to somebody and delivering a story to somebody, the first thing you're going to do is basically inform them. And you're going to say, this thing happened. This event happened at this date, this time, this place. The consumer, the reader, the listener, the viewer, whatever it is, they are going to say, why did this happen? Why are you doing this? And so that's where in this story, in this type of a news story, or you would be trying to explain why that happens. Why did a compassionate ministry carry this out? Now, to you, as you delivered a story like this, it's a bit of a rhetorical question. Of course, we know why. Every single time I do an interview with someone that I talk to, my favorite is that I did recently was actually on Thursday. I had an interview for a story that we wrote from a group of people from Iowa, which is very near to Kansas City, and they grow corn, their sweet corn crop, and harvest it every year and sell it to the community, and all of the proceeds go to missions funds, missions giving, missions trips around the world, in the US. It doesn't matter. They raise thousands and thousands of dollars, and they've done it for 25 years every single year, and they've raised almost $250,000 since they started. I mean, it's a really cool ministry. So when I go through there, I'm a Nazarene, they're Nazarenes, they've been Nazarenes forever, they love missions. It's a very, like, I personally, I understand why, but you're trying to explain to the reader, why does this matter? So it almost becomes a rhetorical question when you're talking to someone about what is happening, or when you yourself are writing up something or trying to put out information about something that happened, is you want to tell people why you're doing this. Why did this happen? Why are we called to these people? Why do we feel called to work with people who don't have homes? Why do we feel called to people to work with single mothers? Those types of things are kind of how we demonstrate and explain. Oops, going too far here. Someone got to the admit button before I did. Some people, what you're trying to do is explain to people why, and hopefully non-believers, why we do what we do. Why do we as Nazarenes care about the marginalized? Why do we as Nazarenes really care about missions and what God is doing around the world? And I think the biggest thing too is provides evidence of the impact of what is going on in your story. So let's say a youth camp happens and you're trying to tell people about this youth camp. You're probably going to tell people when it happened. You're going to tell people how many kids, young adults, youth, NYI members went. You're probably going to tell them when and where it was. You're going to tell them who spoke, and you're going to give them some of the information. But then the question becomes, well, did it do anything? Sure, you can put out. So then that's where you provide evidence. This story, by just writing simply, oh, this camp was wonderful, this was impactful, it impacted so many lives. Okay, where's the evidence of that? How many kids got saved? How many people gave their hearts to the Lord? Did people feel a call to ministry in this camp? And so that's where this next part is too really important in trying to provide evidence of impact when you share a story about an event. is quotes. Quotes, as my editor used to tell me, and a lot of even my very early journalism professors. When we write, especially myself in my role, I have to write in third person constantly. Not talking about I believe this, I said this. It's always they said this person said this, said something, and then I have to use this quote to provide evidence of what they said. If I have something that I'm trying to inform you of, I need to back it up with evidence, and quotes are your greatest force of evidence. So citas, that is, I mean, that they are so incredibly important to making the story something that, okay, now you've started to personalize this with the reader. And that is what that really goes a long way in this. So as we talk about quotes here, and let's say you're trying to build out your idea for a news story, identify someone who wants to share the testimony of how they're impacted. Let's say you are if there's any NCM leaders in here, let's say you hold a clothing giveaway or something like that. A clothing giveaway, a food giveaway, food baskets, something like that, to kind of reach out to people in need in your community. Identify somebody as you are in and around your time. Identify a story that you hear. Obviously, you're going to hear stories when you're having conversations with these people. You're going to hear about what the struggles that they're going through. Identify someone that would be willing to share the testimony of how something that how they were impacted by whatever your news story is, whether it's a camp, whether it's a revival service, a meeting, whether it's like I said, a compassionate ministry event, is it an evangelistic event? The testimony of the impact of something of how God impacted them through that event is just really incredible. Incredibly powerful storytelling tool that we have in our tool belts to use when we inform people about what God is doing. So identify someone, ask them questions, and record responses. Who are they? Name and first and last name, and the spelling is like the most crucial thing. I specifically make sure that every single person, it could be the most easiest English name is John Smith, and they could tell me that's their name, and I will ask them, please spell it out for me, because some random person might use a Y instead of an I in Smith, and I then publish that, and wow, I look like a goofball because I didn't get the name right. And then you, in a more journalism type thing, you start kind of getting at odds with people who would be your sources. First and last name spelling, incredibly important to the accuracy of the quote. Now, obviously, there are some situations, children's camp, minors, you probably don't want to put out the full first and last name of a 9-year-old. Feel free to change their name to something that protects them, or protect if they are in a more sensitive situation, sensitive home life, stuff like that. We change names all the time, or completely omit the name and say a woman who attended said, and then we would put an asterisk next to that. And at the bottom of the article, when we write these things, we say that the name was changed or omitted for protection, for privacy, and stuff like that. So you can share these stories. People might feel ashamed. People might not be ready to share that quite yet and have their name and their face to it. And that provides them an opportunity to share while not having to feel something about how they put it out there. I would recommend doing that as a very last resort. But the names, just so incredibly important. Why did they come to the event? That's another thing. Why are they there? Is what were they expecting out of the event? And what made the impact? How did God work in their lives in those moments? Those are really, really incredible. 3 really easy questions that honestly sometimes people could talk to you about for 15 minutes. Sometimes my interviews that I do for this job, I can ask 3 questions, and they will be 3 questions asked in almost 20 to 25 minutes, because people, all they are is very simple, and it allows your subject to just talk and just tell you what God is doing and the great things that's happening in their life. Soccer world, that's very different. I feel like I have to, like, it's like taking an orange, right? And you want to juice it. You really have to really put it into the juicer to get something out of it. But in our world, people, when you're asking people to share their story and their testimony, they're really going to be willing to talk most of the time. And that is exactly what this is. This is their testimony. They're testifying to what God has done in their life. They're testifying to how God is changing and shaping and molding them. And that's a really important aspect to show, as we go back to the whole concept of this news story. You are providing bits of evidence as to how God worked in in this moment and in those moments that you're informing people about. The cool part here is that these things really start to open up the next story type, which I believe is the hardest story type. I could probably count the amount of these stories that I've gotten to tell in the last 3 years on my 2 hands. And I have written, I can guarantee you, I've written well over 200, 300 stories in the last 2 or 3 years here. These are incredibly difficult stories to get because of the relationships that are required and the vulnerability that are required. But we're talking about an entire story of just somebody's testimony, somebody's story of how God has worked in their life. So these are what we call stories of transformation. And these are going to, and we talk about these news stories, right? And I talked about these points where you want to highlight a little bit of what happened in somebody's life to use as evidence as to what this is doing. So you're really, really, really zooming in right now on that subject when you write this type of story. I think go back to the story about the woman at the well, right? And we can take the entire parable in this context. What's the news there? The news is that Jesus went to that village and saved many people at a very basic level. That's what happened in this parable. The story, though, as we expand to really what's in the text, Jesus saved a lot of people in that village because of this interaction with the woman at the well and the testimony of the woman at the well to the community. There's a great, if we had recorders and interviewer times and we were in paper back then, we would go directly to those people and say, okay, how did God do something? What did God do in your life? How did you become saved in this moment? And you would be piecing together a little bit of a story that kind of goes along with what we see in that passage, with a few quotes from people here and there. And really, the woman at the well is a great primary source of information. She is going to say, this is it. This is what happened. And so what you see in that text is the closest thing to a news story that you'll ever get about that event. Now, when we talk about a story of transformation, we're talking about a story that focuses directly on the woman at the well. And you're going to sit down and you're going to talk with her, and she would tell you everything that ever happened in her life. She would tell you how God transformed her. She would tell you how she felt alone in the dark times, and how now that God is there, walking alongside her in her life. You could do that with the Samaritans as well. That she went back to the village of her fellow Samaritans and said and told them what was happening, and told them what God did. So these are very, very personal stories. Recently, I got the opportunity to share one of these stories about a woman named Rachel. She lives in New Mexico, and Rachel had a very difficult past. She had grown up in Los Angeles, was dealing with addictions, had an abusive husband, and moved to New Mexico just to try and get away from it all. And unfortunately, a lot of it followed her back to New Mexico. Her fiance was at the time had been abusing her physically, mentally. he was kind of the reason why they were still kind of stuck in a cycle of addiction and dealing with drugs and alcohol. And she had became friends with a woman at her child's bus stop when she first moved to New Mexico. They were both in the same spot. They both lamented the fact that God was, or they didn't lament God, but they lamented where they were at in their lives and feeling stuck, feeling like they can't get out of anything. Well, Sandia Church of the Nazarene in Albuquerque has an incredible addiction recovery program. And this lady, Rachel's friend's husband got into this program as a prison aversion type of opportunity. And he became really, really close to God going into COVID. Eventually, this lady, Rachel, her friend died. Her friend's wife, goodness gracious, I'm butchering this. Her friend started going to this church as well, and really started to get involved in the Bible study and what was going on. During COVID, this friend's husband passed away, and passed away from COVID. And a couple months later, this woman, Rachel's friend, went to get baptized and asked for her to come. She came and went to Sandia Valley Church of the Nazarene, and in that moment was the perfect moment of deliverance from all of the issues that she had had. Rachel's husband had been incarcerated and was going to be away for a long time. She was desperate to change their situation, change their life. And in that moment, the message that she heard, she can testify that, wow, I really needed to hear this. My kids need this good news, this good message. They've been through so much. They need to learn how to cope. And I believe that the Bible will help them learn how to cope with everything that's gone on in their world. So she started sending them to stuff and starting getting really involved in herself. Now they have been attending, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the discipleship place from Nazarene Discipleship International from NDI, but they have completed, she's almost completely completed the lay ministry courses. In that she is a #1 volunteer for all of their events and works tirelessly to help that Church of the Nazarene in Albuquerque continue to do what it's doing. And the most incredible thing about it is that she has recognized that her testimony is incredibly useful to people who have been in her situation. She said our story was titled Out of the Fire because she kept telling me that she feels like God is telling her to go back into the fire and bring people who have been in her situation out with her. This was an incredible story. She honestly close to wept for most of the interview, just out of thankfulness and to what God has done and how God has transformed her. These are such incredibly difficult stories to get because you kind of need some of the good stuff on the other end, and this takes time to develop. But it also takes relationships and trust. Her biggest mentor at the church is one who feeds me stories a lot about what's going on in Albuquerque and the stories that she hears. Her name is Patty Rivas. She's one of the most wonderful women you'll ever meet. She really trusted Patty, and Patty told her, you can trust this guy with your story. You can trust telling him this stuff. I told him my story, and you can trust this. And so that trust was there before I even pressed dial on the phone to talk to her. And so when you were in that moment, in your ministries, you guys have access to these people a lot that will have these types of stories. If it's in a compassion ministry, if it's someone that's going to your church, you are potentially a very trustworthy source for this information. That is where you can be the broker there of this trust and share this story. And I think using this illustration of the woman at the well is an incredible opportunity for you to help people tell these stories, an illustration of what happens when we tell these stories. One brief illustration again before I get through kind of these points on this slide. when I first came here, they were telling me about how much they wanted these stories of transformation. And I said, awesome. I know one of the coolest women you'll ever meet. She went to my church. I was almost part of this story. I've watched it develop over in front of my eyes over the years. Let me see, is that okay if we try and tell her story, even though it's someone that I know? Because there's a little bit of there's a technical journalistic ethic that if you are friends with somebody, you would technically not write about them like that. But in this instance, for what we're doing for the Church of the Nazarene, that friendship and that relationship is necessary to get that story. So we sat and we talked with her, and I had her share her story with me while we recorded it. We went back and we wrote this story. About a year later, I was doing a story about a woman in Colorado who had kind of also come through the same thing. I knew their pastors there. They said, you can trust talking to Daniel. He will tell you this. He will write up your story in a very good way. It will, shine the right light on the things that need to be shined on. But be comfortable telling him about your struggles and your past and stuff like that. So she opened up to me her story of addiction and all of this stuff. And she said, somebody shared a story. I remembered when they told me about Nazarene News, when my pastors told me about that Nazarene News wanted to talk to me about this, closed closet thing that we were doing. I remembered it. And I said, okay, why? And she goes, well, someone years ago had sent me, not years ago, but last year, when we were still dealing with all these issues in our life, someone sent me this story about how this woman had overcome her addiction and that she trusted that God would do this. And she sent me the link. And sure enough, it's that story, that original story of transformation I wrote. These are really incredible tools that you have to tell people that they can evangelize. They can do a whole lot. So as I said, these are testimonies. These are personal stories, embracing the struggle and the pain. We all know there can't be light without darkness, right? This is a physics thing. It's a reality thing. Because there is light, there is darkness. There is always an opposite. This is an opportunity for people to open up about their the humanity of who they are. And it allows them to be relatable to in the same level of the consumer of this news, whether it's a writer or whether they're reading, viewing it, or listening. Make sure they're comfortable with sharing this information before asking questions about it. Excuse me, I've been talking a lot and not drinking water enough, and now my throat's a little dry. Esteban can attest, the last time I did this, I did not drink enough water as well, because Esteban was in the room with me and he was like, drink water, drink water. So was my good friend Angel, and telling me to speak slower so the translation is easier. So Alanis, I hope I'm doing well in that aspect. I'm doing my best. But goodness, so these make sure they're comfortable with sharing this information before asking questions about it. When I talked to Rachel the other day, Rachel, I told her up front and I said, look, you don't have to tell me anything that you don't want to tell me, and that's okay. And all I had to do was ask a simple question. And I said, so how did God transform you? And she immediately broke into tears and began to share and open up that moment. And it's not that I pushed buttons. I didn't do anything. I told her up front and I said, if you don't feel comfortable sharing it with me, you don't have to share it with me. But she did feel comfortable sharing it with me and eventually felt like that was necessary to tell her testimony. I think in making your interview, the person that you're asking these stories and asking these questions for and asking them to tell you their story, it's really important that you humanize them as much as possible, and not be judgmental of the bad things that they've done in the past. And when you can show that you can do that, that's where you get that level of trust from that source of information, and the source of these stories, that God, they're willing to tell you about this because they know that you are looking for that redemption and those things, the transformation that has happened in their life and what God has done in that spot. Be even though. please. I know a lot of these stories, it's really, really easy to like focus on all of this bad that they've done. I've done this before where I realized I wrote my word limit here is supposed to be 500 words. Most of the time I can push it out to like 600 or so. But there are some times where I get through something and I'm like, wow, this is 900 words. I have to cut a lot. And I go through and maybe 750 words are about the bad things that this person has experienced. And I'm trying to set up everything, set up the transformation. When in reality, it should be kind of a balance there, right? If I have, let's say I have 600 words, ideally in my head, I think about I should have 200 words about the rough times and the struggles of their life pre-Jesus, right? I should have about 200 words about Jesus, what happened the moment Jesus came. And then about another 200 words that's talking about how are they walking out of that. So when you're doing a video and you're interviewing it and you might need to cut some stuff, and let's say you've got 15 minutes of this guy's telling you about all the bad things he's done in his life, and then you've got another 10 minutes of them telling you about what God did and 5 minutes about what they want to do in the future. It's okay to kind of whittle that down. Try and be even there, because you don't want to just bombard people with, I am just this awful person. I was an awful person. You really want to highlight that transformation that happened in their life. In a way, when you're doing this, this last point, you're in by showing this where they're going, and the next steps for them, and what it looks like in the future of this person that's giving you their story of transformation. Did you inspire the consumer of this information and the story to get involved? Does your subject now volunteer at church? Do people say, wow, I did some terrible things and I kind of like Jesus now, but am I really doing enough? How do I get involved in your church? Have they made positive changes in their life? That, the coolest part I think about the story from Rachel was the fact that she started sending her fiance these materials in prison, and just felt like God had said, your story's not over here. And she felt like, I just need to see if God can change me, he can change him too. How do I do this? Started sending him the materials. Now, when she and her kids go to visit him, the fact that he was abusing her, they go to visit him now, and they together dive into the word, together dive into these Bible stories and these studies, and are working to make each other grow closer to Christ. That's an incredible aspect, but that's something that maybe someone that's reading says, man, I know this person in prison. They can change too. I can send this, I can do this. So you're inspiring people to get involved with this in some way, shape, or form by what you've written in this story of transformation. In news stories, it's the same exact thing. Answering the question of why we do this is a bit of a call to action for people to do that, to kind of really get engaged with what you're hearing. So this is a fun part that we have here of this that's at here at the Global Ministry Center. This is what we do. Our Nazarene News motto is to inform, inspire, and engage. And my friend Angel Segui, I don't know how many of you know him or have heard of him or have dealt with the crazy man that he is. He is one of my closest friends, and he did a really good job of putting this illustration together, is to thinking about inform and inspire and engage as the head, the heart, and the feet. The head, people are informed. Are people informed about something that they didn't know? The basic level of what we're trying to do in news stories. The heart, are people inspired by this information? Is the story inspiring, or is there the information, the testimony in a news story about a conference or a youth event that happened? Has that inspired somebody? And then the feet, the inspiration leads to action. Are people inspired to move into action and to engage with what they have heard and start walking in what they've heard and said, okay, cool, I can do that ministry in my church. My church, we have cornfields. Why can't we sell some of this and raise money to send to a project. All of those things kind of come up here. Because I've taken a little bit longer in this time than I expected, we'll go this next portion here. I want to talk about. I think it's really important for you guys to understand how, when you share these stories, and let's say they have all these elements to them, why it matters for you guys in your local context. I think, so bear with me, this got a little smushed. In your local context, it informs people about your projects. Most of the people who follow a ministry of yours on social media, or people who are tuned into your church and what they're doing, they want to know specifically about what your church is doing. So locally, you really need to inform them about all the things that you're doing, all of your projects and things that are happening. Does it entice people to get involved? Yes, right. This is the engage opportunity, but it also allows for partnership opportunities within your community. If you're getting the word out of what your church or what your ministry is doing in your community, you are allowing yourself to open up the doors for partnerships and people to come in and say, hey, we really like what you're doing. We feel like we have this resource to offer. Can we partner with you? I think there's a really cool story that we did recently about a video game tournament that was done in England, the wonderful and my personal favorite video game of FIFA, which is all about soccer. They held this tournament in England, and it's put on by a guy who attends Manchester Nazarene Theological College there in England. And he runs a ministry that's a video game ministry, and they strictly get, young males, young females that play video games into a room together, and they say, hey, we're just going to hang out and play video games. And they say, all right, we'll pause. Let's have a Bible study. So they put on this tournament, but because of what they've been doing, because of the word that they had been getting out in their community about this ministry, a larger partner came along, and they partnered together for this massive FIFA tournament and Mario Kart tournament at a big event in a public park in Manchester. Hundreds of kids signed up. They had all kinds of prizes. These organizations got involved. And guess what? During the final timeout, they held the timeout, what they call timeouts, between the semifinal and the final. And they shared the gospel. They had a speaker. They had an artist perform. 70 kids that day gave their lives to the Lord. And all of this partnership happened just because my friend George or Jorge, he cracks me up. He tells me he goes by George in the UK because nobody there understands how to pronounce Jorge. So my buddy Jorge, because he was getting the word out in Manchester about his ministry, partners found a way to get involved, and it made even greater impact, and multiplied the resources that God has for the kingdom. And so, this is the other thing too that this does, is this offers a flow of information and ideas for others. How are you going to be a resource with this information to a lot of your local partners, your brother and sister churches? I assume many of the churches and districts and in your districts and in your zones follow up with each other. They hear about what the other is doing, and the exchange of information about what is working and what doesn't work between your local churches is really vital, because you are the ones directly involved in your context. Sometimes what might work in a church in Italy isn't going to work in a church in El Salvador. So those local connections are really important, because you are really plugged into your community, and you will know exactly what is supposed to, what really works and what makes sense for people in that community. And that's part of the thing too, is that those cultures and contexts are difficult to bridge across and work sometimes at the global level. So the local, sharing your stories and sharing this information at a local level can be really vital for your church and the other churches that are partnering with you in the Nazarene world in your area. So we're going to take a break here. Actually made it on time This is wonderful. We're going to take a break here, about 5 minutes. We'll come back, grab some water, get some food, do whatever you need to do. And in the meantime, during that time, I want you to think about what is going on in your ministries, in your churches, and even your own lives, and what type of story that might turn into, and how would you choose to share that? So then we'll talk more a little bit when we come back from break. But take about a 5-minute break, yeah, I'll see you back here in 5.
Hola, ¿estás creando contenido digital para tocar vidas? ¿Eres youtuber, produces podcast, eres parte de una banda, grupo de música o tienes algún emprendimiento digital? ¿Te gustaría que fueran promovidos en nuestras plataformas? Queremos conocerte. Escríbenos a contacto@mesonas.org y recibirás más información. Iglesia del Nazareno Mesoamérica. Hola, somos Iglesia del Nazareno Región Mesoamérica. Y te invitamos a que nos sigas en Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp y en nuestra página web. Activa las notificaciones en redes sociales para que no te pierdas de ninguna información importante. Iglesia del Nazareno Mesoamérica, unidos en Cristo para servir.
Bueno, ¿cómo vamos? ¿Cómo vamos? Espero que estén disfrutando de este tiempo. Daniel tiene bastante experiencia, pero yo sé que van a haber preguntas. A mí no me queda la menor duda de que pueden surgir algunas preguntas, así que cualquier duda que tengan, cualquier pregunta que esté saliendo ahorita en sus mentes ahí, apúntenla por ahí, porque vamos a tener un espacio de preguntas y respuestas al final. Así que y Daniel está, bueno, deseoso por responder, que se muere ganas por responder a sus preguntas. Así que apunten todo lo que tengan por ahí bueno, esperamos que estén disfrutando de esta capacitación. Gracias por el apoyo al Ministerio de Comunicaciones y estamos planeando una siguiente capacitación para finales de septiembre sobre organización de ministerios de comunicaciones. Así que creo que es un tema bastante interesante también. También estoy pensando o estamos coordinando con alguien del GMC, de la sede, que nos pueda echar la mano con este tema. Pero bueno, ahí le estamos avisando. Daniel, are you ready? Seguimos entonces.
It helps if I'm not muted, right? Goodness gracious. It's like I'm new to Zoom or something. Goodness. I've been doing this for how many years now and can't remember to unmute myself. Anyways, all right. So before we went to break.
You mute yourself.
That's incredible. Goodness, man. I was just trying to change the slide and this is what happens. All right. So as I asked you during the break, I wanted you to ponder kind of what's going on in your ministries and in your churches. I want if we could just have one person, I'd love for you guys to share. If anyone is willing to raise their hand, you can go down at the bottom of your screen and to the reactions and hit raise hand. And I'll have Esteban or Alanis pick one to share. I'm very curious. I just want a quick story of something God is doing in their own ministry context, whether that's personally or through your ministry lately. So if anyone's willing, I'll give just a little bit of time here to wait for that hand to raise. And if someone wants to step in, we'd love for you to kind of share a story that kind of maybe and where you think that would fall into one of those three types of stories that we've talked about. Anybody? One hand, don't be shy.
Daniel, I have a story. Oh, okay, no, Inés Gomez.
Yeah. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Inés, and then we can hear you.
Good morning.
Morning.
So you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Ok. Bueno, voy a tratar de hacer una
I'm going to
reseña
try
cortita.
and do it very simple. I thank God that God has impacted me and changed my life. I was born in a complicated community, poor community, and bad behavior in our family. They abuse us in our family. My father was an alcoholic. I have very memories about it. And I remember when I was 8 years, my mom accepted Jesus in her life, your Savior. And since then, she began going to the church and taking us with her. And our mother had a complicated way of taking us to church. She didn't have the resources to go to church, but she began. And because of that, because of what she did, that helped us to know Jesus, and it helped me and study and have a job. And then I began to serve in the church and so on in the district. And when I arrived at the district, I met my husband. And if God changed my family, now I have my own family living in a different way. And that would be my story.
Thank you, Ines. Gracias, gracias. I appreciate that. Wow. A really cool story of how God has transformed not just your life, but has transformed your family's lives for generations. And that's the power of these stories and what God is doing. And these are just incredible incredible stories about how and I say your story is special, but there are so many that are just like yours that are out there that we have the opportunity to tell. And how does that affect someone who's reading it and finds themselves in the midst of that story? So in the next set, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that actually, of why telling these stories matters globally. And this is from a perspective of just working here at the Global Ministry Center and seeing how people in the field are resourced by our various ministries. Some of you who might be in the NMI world, you see NMI and NMI only, but what you don't see is here in Kansas City, how the people at NMI kind of help bring all these things down to the local level, and how all of these departments here, even NDI, even NYI and communications and all of the different departments here all work together to kind of bring all of this together globally and kind of help resource people that are in the field there. Same with NCM. I can't leave them out as well, but those are all those things kind of work together. So when we share these stories like Ines, these stories that I've talked about, that I've gotten to share in the last couple of years, these are stories that can have a global impact. Discipleship makers, man, that's one of the biggest things that we are focusing on here as a church, the journey of grace. How are we making disciples? How are we really walking alongside of people? Our stories are one of the greatest evangelistic tools that we have. And because of prevenient grace, our stories can potentially be the moment of that helps spurs the moment per se of saving grace for somebody. And the stories along can also play a part in prevenient grace. I mean, these all have the option that when you share these stories, this has the ability to make an impact in someone's life and make them think, wow, maybe I should go do this. Maybe I should go to church. Maybe I should go. Listen, if you think about, some of you can probably attest to this, but the moment that you gave your life to Christ, what was the speaker? Who was the speaker that night? Was it a pastor? Was it the same guy you've heard however many times? Or was it someone that was brought in to relate to you? Someone that was brought in to kind of to help facilitate that moment, right? These stories you'll end up sharing that you share globally. They trickle as much as what we do maybe in the Global Ministry Center will try and trickle down to the local level. These trickle back up the stream. your NMI leader at let's say you're the NMI president at your church. Okay, so you tell your district NMI person, that district NMI person is passing that story along. And as those stories get passed along, guess what? In some next NMI training, guess whose story they're going to use as an example. These are just those types of things, and how sharing our story really helps that NCM, NDI, NYI, NMI, stories of how someone was brought to Christ by demonstrating Christ to them. These are all examples that are used for people who think about implementing changes in how they do ministry. They're part of the process as we train people into becoming disciple makers, to becoming evangelizers, and to becoming people who eventually work out in the field. These are success stories of what God has done through the Church of the Nazarene. We learn from these, we figure out what we're doing right, maybe what we're doing wrong at times, and we can continue to adapt to become the best possible version of our church, which is going to go and make Christ-like disciples of all the nations. Surprise, that's our church's mission statement, to make Christ-like disciples in the nations. I mean, that's what we're after here. And so these stories help play a significant role in that. Innovation is part of it too. Someone sitting in the Philippines can hear this story about what is happening in El Salvador, or they hear about this at a training, and they start the process of engaging with the information, right? We talked earlier a little bit about this, the head, the heart, and the feet. Most of the time when people are in these moments, the head and the heart are already in it, but they're looking for something to get their feet moving to. These stories help spark those ideas around the world and help affect change going on in all 6 regions of our church. And obviously in their own ministries, maybe a story, a person from the Philippines or from, Papua New Guinea is saying, this man in El Salvador, let me tell you about what God did in his life. Those are really powerful ways that people connect not only with the global vision of who we are as a denomination and who we are as a church, but they also connect with, goodness, my words, they help connect, they really do help connect that global vision of who we are as a church and as a denomination, with that very global focus. Fundraising, part of sharing stories is showing people where their money is going, and their offering is and how it impacts people. I know we specifically, when we do kind of missions, and I'm sure the Easter offering, I'm sure the offering of thanks and some of those things, when we put together marketing materials and resources for churches to have in there, one of the things is one of the biggest things that I do for that is news stories, and I have to go get news stories that share examples of how the World Evangelism Fund and WEF is being used. That's part of this fundraising effort. By demonstrating this, you're not only showing how their offering is making an impact, but you're also giving a name and a face to where constituents' financial sacrifice has gone. When someone gives $1 and gives money to in the offering plate, or gives money to a ministry, and they come back and they say, hey, your $1 helped do this for this person, that says, okay, wow, I'm going to continue giving and help fund these efforts, and even doing so in your own community. We talked about partnership and finding partners in your community, but you're also opportunities to fundraise locally for yourselves as well, and say, hey, our ministry is doing this. If you give money to us, we do more things like this. We affect change in people's lives like this by what our NCM is doing or what our NMI is doing. And then, of course, right, we're talking about global impact generally. People really, really love to hear the stories of what God's doing. We say it all the time here, and that the Nazarene world is a very small one. If you know one person, you can know everyone. The connections that this makes globally. I remember being at a conference here in Kansas City. There's a big pastoral conference every year for the USA Canada, not every year, but every 4 years, I believe. And then it's on a 2-year alternate from what General Assembly is. and it's a big pastoral conference that they do here, and sends everybody in. And I remember seeing this video about a young college-age student from Mid-America as I was going to all of it. And I said, wow, what an incredible story this young man has. Sure enough, the summer that I worked at my summer camp, guess who was I got to be in charge of counselors because I was one of the older ones there. Guess who one of my counselor was? It was him. We made this incredible impact about when we saw each other about, hey, I heard your story. It's incredible what God is doing in your life. Let's talk about how that story is doing things in the lives of people. When we worked at our camp that year, the whole thing was about telling our story to these kids. These kids were and having the kids share their stories. That was the theme of the summer. All of these things go into when you continue to make impacts and make known your story, and you make those connections, those really stick with people. People don't forget that. They don't forget names, they don't forget faces. So as people travel to you as well, some of those faces you're going to come across, and it helps kind of make the Nazarene world feel smaller when you are sitting in your own church and watching a video story maybe of someone halfway across the globe. That's part of what we're doing right now too, is taking some of our news stories that we've written and turning them into longer videos that people can use in trainings, people can use as promotional material, people can use just to share a fantastic testimony. And we're in the process of traveling and gathering some of those stories and doing video shoots for it. You know, what I'm talking about here, I don't want it to just apply to just news writing per se. There's storytelling exists in a lot of different ways. It exists in social media. I know you guys talked to Jenna not that long ago, and Jenna told you all about social media and how it can be used as a really good tool for you. This is part of that social media tool. This is part of writing some of these things out on Facebook to share. You may be putting a news story out on your Facebook account that might not be the 500 words that I have to do to write an article. You could tell people that something happened, all these things happen, and you have a picture or a video that goes with it, and you have a quote from somebody that attended the event, and they are telling how it impacted them. There's a news story in that medium. So, because there's so many different ways that we can get these stories out, we can, as a church, can definitely help facilitate the move of information around the globe with these stories, and help do all of those things we've talked about, and making disciples, helping the churches with ministries with innovation, actually using them as ministry and evangelism tools, using them for fundraising and helping bring the global church together. And that is one of the biggest things that these stories help do, in showing people just how great the work is of what God is doing through us and what we do in the Nazarene Church. So as we've talked a little bit about that, we're going to move shortly here to talking about our stories here. I've given you the story types. We've talked about how these story types kind of affect you at a local level and a global level. But the next part is about identifying your story. How do you know what information you have is what story, and where does it fit? I think there's a couple of different ways here that we can look at this. And so I want to talk about strictly how these will work, these three story types, and maybe give you some tips and ideas of how these stories can get passed out. The first one is going to be news, noticias, right? The very basic form of, we are just sharing basic information with you. There's going to be an event at this day, at this time. you can put that on social media and you don't have to do anything with it. These are stories that you can share in an Instagram post, an Instagram story, an Instagram reel if you want to make a cool video out of it. If you want to feel like you're on TikTok or whatever it is, and do a reel, you can do that. I mean, those are all options for getting that type of information out, and articles as well, right? That's how we do it here at the church, because it's easier to just, here's a link, here's this news, we're going to send it to as many people as possible, and it goes out. Basic news and basic information of, as we talked about. So what were those basic things, right, that are in those press releases and news? We're talking about announcements, about leadership changes and stuff like that. Your church changing pastors. Do you have a new NMI, NCM president? All those kind of things. Does your ministry have a new leader, etc.? Events, the days that they happen, deaths and obituaries that you want to post, in honoring people who have passed on. And then letting people know about an event that happened. Hey, this week we held a clothing giveaway. This many people came through. We gave away this many pieces of clothing. Thankful for your donations, and you move on. That's a basic news social media post. And articles too, that's a way to kind of get that information out even further, help get it to a global level. But especially within your local context, that social media post is incredibly vital in sharing news. And even then, as I mentioned earlier, bulletins. I don't know if you guys have church bulletins or use them, but people, when you're sending out information to your congregation, that is news to them. That is publishing a release of information for them to stay informed about all the things that are happening in your church. So that's it for news per se. Let's talk about news stories. News stories are really versatile, and they can end up in all three mediums that I think we want to talk about, and that are probably the ones that most of you are involved in the most. Obviously, social media posts are wonderful for this. I think that goodness gracious, a little distracted for a second there. Social media posts. I think these are really great, a really great place for news stories as well. What you get to do with telling these stories and telling these types of stories is you're allowing yourself to put a face to the impact within a social media post. So could be, let's say you went on a work and witness trip or a missions trip. You guys carried out an event and a young person was saved, right? Is there a face that goes with that? Did someone give their life to Christ? You say, you're typing out your post about what happened and where you guys went for your work and witness trip. And then in the next, in there you say Esteban, age 15, gave his life to Christ, and shared that he had been struggling with a few things, and he felt like it was time to give his life over to God, and is excited about what's to come as being part of God's kingdom. And there's a smiling picture of 15-year-old Esteban. I mean, that's a great way to put out a news story in its shortest form and its most basic form that's going to affect you locally. I think as we talk about this, the social media post is probably your biggest tool locally, but is also going to help you get a little bit noticed globally. So then we can make articles and write news stories about what your church is doing. If I see a social media post from some church, I'm usually trying to find that church online, find who the pastor is, and call them and get more information so I can fill out the rest of that news story. And then in videos, this is great too, because videos can be used even to share their testimony of someone who is impacted by an event that you're doing in your news story. A camp happens, right? Let's say you do a youth camp that is put on. The youth camp takes place, and a child or a teen gets saved. Do you have them video their testimony real quick and say, you have 5 minutes to tell me about what God did in your life and why you gave your life to Christ and all that kind of stuff? and you put that out on social media as well. The best part too here is that articles and videos can all be turned back into social media posts. So a social media post is going to happen regardless. But the way that you're likely getting most of these articles or videos about an event out is through a social media post. So these are kind of some valuable ways to not only integrate the mediums that you're using between written word and spoken word and video. Even podcasts are part of this too. Great for news stories. I think that's, I know you guys have a podcast here on the Mesoamerica region, but man, maybe you sit down and talk with someone and have them record their story. Does that get sent into the podcast and used? That's an incredible opportunity, an incredible tool that you have as well, that people will listen to as they're going to work, as they're working. I listen to podcasts a lot of times when I'm not writing, because if I'm writing and I hear a podcast, somehow I'm going to start typing what I'm hearing in the podcast. So I've done that, made that mistake before. That's a dangerous one. But we, as podcasts are another, think of a spoken version of an article. Or even a video. This is another medium that these really do very well in. And then one of the last mediums that we'll talk about, or last ones, is the stories of transformation. These stories are very difficult to share directly in a social media post unless you have the video or the article. It's not a news, like I said earlier, you can get away with posting what you would consider information that would fit the news story mold or even the news mold directly onto social media. But in news, right, in these stories of transformation for articles, these stories usually require a lot of information and they require a lot of context. A written article telling the story is one of the most common mediums that you'll hear for people telling really long personal stories. Magazine type interviews, written interviews, that's been the most popular way to do these for a long time. Videos as well, 100%. Video interviews, they make great mini documentaries and are often kind of the purest form of this kind of information. And what I mean the purest form is that you are asking the question and the person is directly telling them. When you're writing an article, you have to be incredibly careful about how you put information that they give you out there and what you yourself say in there, because it's not your story. This person, this interview subject is speaking directly through you. So a news article takes a little bit more, I would say, concern and a little bit more care when you're handling that type of information. Videos, I mean, it's directly out of their mouth, it's recorded, and you're good to go. Same with podcasts. The audio function, if you're recording video and you can pull the audio from the video directly, I mean, you can publish the video somewhere and you can still send the video or the audio file to the podcast. And so where does social media fit in this? Well, it fits in directly into the sharing of the article, the video, or even a podcast in this instance. I think that the sharing of it is that it's its amplification. It's its way of helping make the global connection and helping get that information shared. So I think one of the biggest things too is Esteban might really like me for this one, but share these stories with your region. These are really, I know there's incredible things that are happening in your ministries and in your churches, and it can be really easy to say, well, this is just what I do. This is my everyday life. It is missions. My everyday life is serving these people. Sometimes we get caught in feeling that what we are doing is just our everyday thing and not realizing the incredible impact that it has on people. So I would encourage you to, what you might feel like is your everyday life, to someone sitting in England or someone sitting in Spain or the United States that reads this they're going to say, wow, what an incredible story of what God is doing. Because ultimately, what we're looking for here is not necessarily what, and I mean this nicely, not what you are doing, but what is God doing through you. And I think that's the biggest thing in how we tell these stories, as well, is if we are at a point where we really want to share these with the region, and we're pushing this on, we're saying, okay, it's time for us to share our story about what God is doing. It's a reminder that this is a story, that we're sharing these stories about what God is doing through us and through our ministries, through our and through in the lives of people, through everything that we are doing here. So I appreciate you guys and your time today. I hope some of these things you'll be able to take and apply and have it stick with you. As this is all I have, at least for information to give you guys. I really hope that you guys, as you think about what is happening in your ministries, what is happening in your context, in your church, and even in your own lives, you kind of see where, okay, the value of this information, what it is, and where we can share it, and how can we share it, and then what type of story do I have to share, and in doing so, you can continue to share the stories about what God is doing, and help us help be part of the global Church of the Nazarene in doing so, and in sharing those stories and allowing people to hear, allowing people to be transformed, allowing people to be inspired by what you are doing in your community all around the world. So thanks again. And I do want, as Esteban said, I would love to leave it open for questions here. We technically are scheduled to go right through 11. We don't have to go that long. But if you have questions, I am all ears. We've got plenty of time to field some questions. And yeah, I probably could stop talking now at this point, right?
Hermanos, hermanas, amigos y amigas, ¿alguna pregunta? ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta o algún comentario? ¿Consideran que hay algo que a ustedes no les quedó claro? ¿Les gustaría clarificar en este momento? Jenny, adelante, Jenny.
Sí, un saludo, hermanos, desde aquí, de México, Campeche,
Greetings from Mexico,
Mhm.
from the Second Church of Campeche.
Mhm.
Truly, there are things that we do, that we have done from experience from our day life. This has helped me a lot. That helps me furthermore from my study, my missionary studies, that all the stuff, all the work that these missionary people do in compassion. So this has helped me, that we have a lot of information. And as Daniel said, we can pick the things that are more important. So thank you, Daniel, because I have felt that this information has helped me, and we have situations, and I can turn that into something to share, and an interest for other people, to the people know the story and share with it. So God bless you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Go ahead. I see another hand there. Ana Crocker Diaz.
Que Dios les bendiga. Buenos días.
God bless you. I'm the coordinator of Region of Missions, and I'm very happy that you guys are here. And from our sister Jenny, in this ministry.
Casi siempre nosotros queremos contar historias de nuestras congregaciones.
We always want to share stories
Estoy saliendo de COVID,
in
todavía está mi garganta.
our ministry, and I'm sorry, I'm with COVID
Muchas
and
veces
I'm a little
las
sick.
los mismos líderes, sea
And
local o de
sometimes
distrito,
the leaders
no nos
in
comparten las historias y ahí
in the
se nos
district
hace
or
muy
local
difícil.
churches,
Y
we
ahí también
we don't have
que yo
the
he tratado
stories.
de
They
escuchar
don't share the story with us.
es
And something that I now
nosotros
have
tenemos
heard,
que estar muy seguros
that we
de
have
lo
to
que
be
vamos a
very
compartir.
sure that what we are gonna
Recuerdo que
share. I remember
de las líderes en
that
Nicaragua
one of the
me manda un
leaders in
mensaje y
Nicaragua
me dice, hermana,
sent me a message.
tenemos a una hermana que nos vino a compartir
We have a
CNN
sister
y
that
ella nos
came
dijo
with
que
us and
esto que
share
nosotros
missions
hacemos ya no existe.
that we do
Entonces
now,
ella se
the missions, it
sorprendió,
doesn't
¿verdad?
exist.
Pero
And
igual como
she
dice
was
mi hermana,
surprised.
si nosotros contamos la historia tenemos que
But
estar
if we
muy
share
seguros
the
de
stories, we
que
have
lo
to
que
be
estamos
really sure
contando es
that what we share
verídico, como
is
dijiste,
is
hermano,
the
que
truth.
estás dirigiendo
And as you
esta
said, Daniel, that you are
entonces
leading this
tenemos que estar
workshop,
seguros de que
we have to be sure
esto que vamos a compartir va a
that what we are
llegar
going to share
a las
is going
personas,
to
no solo para que lo conozcan, sino
impact
también
these
para que
people,
se hagan parte de
and not
estas
only
cosas
for
y de
impact,
las
but
noticias que
for
estamos
them to be
compartiendo.
part
Así
of
que he
this
aprendido mucho
ministry
en
in
esta
our
mañana
church.
también.
So I have learned a lot
Es algo que yo hago,
in this
compartir historias
morning,
en la
and that is something
página
that
de
I
Facebook
do.
que
I
tenemos como
I share
ministerio
stories in
y ha
Facebook
sido de gran
page.
valor, así que
So it
gracias.
has been
Dale
really
que
good.
Dios te
So
siga
thank you,
usando
Daniel.
y
God
que todos esos
keep using you,
que tienes, pues podamos
and
seguirlos escuchando más
all that
adelante.
you know, we can keep hearing it. So God bless you.
Thank you, Anna. Appreciate it. I see another hand raised here too. Profe Javier Lopez. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
¿Qué tal? Buen día, mucho
Good
gusto.
morning.
Yo soy de la ciudad
I'm
de
from
Guatemala.
I'm from city of
Dos
Guatemala.
puntos bastante
Ujú.
importantes.
2 points,
Creo que
very important.
por muy lo voy a decir en este sentido.
I'm gonna say it
No
this way,
desvalorando el hecho de que fuimos rescatados en algún momento del
but not minimizing
la
the
historia. Nunca supongamos que porque no fue
way well we
extraída,
have
digamos,
been
de un vicio
saved,
o de una catástrofe o una gran dificultad y que muchas veces
that we
simplemente hemos dejado
shouldn't never
a Jesús
minimize
porque
our
lo
story,
escuché en una radio, estaba viendo
or
una
because I
noticia,
have heard this
lo
story
vi
in the
una red social
newspaper or
y
the
fue lo
radio,
suficiente que Dios
but
utilizó
that
para
has been
convencerme de aceptarlo como Salvador. Ese es el secreto
everything.
también
It has been
importante, el
enough
hecho de que
for me
hayas
to be
dejado tu
saved.
vida atrás
To
y
hear the stories
conocido a
in
Jesús como tu
the
Salvador.
radio or
Eso
the
ya lo hace
newspaper,
impactante y especial.
so that
Otra,
only that make
en el
it
momento en que
even more
compartan en la MLS, donde comúnmente se
greater.
comparten las vidas de personas que han sido rescatadas, no se lean las historias, sino
And
que se
another thing
narren,
is that
porque creo que hay
something we do is that
algo
we read the
más
stories, but
apreciado
we don't see
y más
like they
impactante
are
cuando
narrating,
compartes algo que
they
no
are telling the
solamente te ha
story. We
impactado
just
a ti,
read it like it's
porque
a
muchas
story.
veces cuando leemos
It is like a
historias
fiction story,
diferentes
but it's something that
se
has
quedan
happened
en lo
to
bueno
other
que
people.
vivimos, pero no en lo bueno que trae la historia. Entonces yo
And
creo que ese es un
sometimes
punto
we say, oh,
clave
we
para
have read
entender
something very
primeramente su
good,
historia,
but we forget that this is
empatizar,
someone's story.
tratar de imaginar escenas de quien compartió su vida, de cómo
And we
vivió
need
su
to
vida
imagine or
y
think
luego
about
narrarlo.
what this person have
Ahorita
passed.
existen muchos medios, por ejemplo los podcasts,
And
bastante
yeah, there's a lot
accesiblemente y sencillo para poder
resources
compartir
like
la
podcasts
historia, lo que está haciendo también la iglesia de compartir los perfiles
and
de sus
other
líderes
things that the
a lo
church
largo del
is
mundo.
doing,
Eso le
like
está
around the
dando
world.
un plus en
It's
Cristo,
giving us a
digamos, cómo
plus
Jesús ha llegado a nuestra vida.
to share our stories.
Adelante.
So thank you for that.
Thank you, Javier. Yeah, I think that's always the biggest thing that I've come across, and even in the sports world and in writing about soccer stuff, if you treat everybody's story that you hear not just as in as important as it is, and taking their story and saying, wow, this is an incredible story. Every story to me, I believe that I have to approach that way, that every story is a story of what God is doing. And that in itself is a very, very, I'm trying to think of the right word. That is a very big weight on the shoulders of every single story that gets put out. And in taking, okay, oh, we just heard this, but that's an incredible story of what God is doing in their community. And when you continue to take stories that you hear and treat them with that respect and with that level of respect, and especially doing so when you share them, what happens is that people continue to become more trustworthy of you, or find you as a trustworthy person to share that information and share those stories that are really, really powerful. And all stories are powerful, correct? And I think some, though, will be able to speak to other people better. And they, God will use a certain story to speak to a certain person. It may not 100% hit or kind of make the mark with the next person as well. But, I think that's part of how you share these stories, and in taking your interview subjects at a very personal level and treating them with the utmost respect, and humanizing them in a way. A lot of these people will be telling you about mistakes. They'll be telling you about bad things that they've done, and there's a lot of times there's even shame involved with some of that. And in helping humanize them in that way, it really helps. I can tell you one thing that we had happen even in the soccer world recently here, was someone got in big trouble from the soccer team, and they got suspended. And I had to talk with him about that. And he didn't want to talk to anyone but me, because he trusted me to talk about what had happened. He trusted not that I would tell it from his perspective, but that I would just tell the truth. I would just tell what I had heard and tell the story in this way. And as I went back and I heard his story and I talked to other people, I realized that his story was true. We put the story out there, and I think it served its purpose. And someone in their most vulnerable, I made a mistake moment, was willing to share that information and said, here's what happened, here's how it went down. And that was really able to provide context, the proper context of the whole situation to people. But that doesn't happen without you treating every single subject that you listen to as a child of God. And I think I do my best to carry that over into my world as well, and into my sports world, as much as I utilize it here when I'm writing about stories for the church, is that the people that you are interviewing are children of God. They are loved by Christ. Christ died for them on the cross. And no matter what they have done in their lives, their story is still of incredible value to be shared around the world. And I think, and allowing God to speak through that is allowing the process of God's grace to continue to make its way around the rest of the world, and make its way and continue to change people's lives. Any other questions that we've got?
¿Tienen más preguntas? ¿Alguna otra pregunta más? ¿Un comentario?
Nene, yo tengo un comentario. Yo recuerdo en 1994, yo tenía 9 años y a nosotros se nos quemó la casa. Tuvimos un incendio y perdimos todo. Y fue muy difícil porque éramos mis papás. Mis papás no tenían mucha educación. Mi mamá no tenía casi nada de educación. Y entonces era una situación muy difícil, muy complicada. Perdimos todo. Entonces, al día siguiente llegó un grupo de personas a dejarnos ropa, juguetes y comida y un montón de cosas. Y esa gente era una iglesia en Nazareno. Fue la iglesia en Nazareno de Tibás en San José, Costa Rica. Y ese fue el gancho, el clic que necesitábamos para ser parte de la iglesia. Nosotros habíamos escuchado hablar de esa iglesia, pero no íbamos a esa iglesia. Pero a partir de esa experiencia, nos hicimos nazarenos Y desde 1994, somos parte de la Iglesia Nazareno por una historia trágica, pero por un acto de amor desinteresado de una gente que era desconocida para nosotros. Es una historia que tengo yo con la Iglesia Nazareno.
Mhm. Praise God. Praise God. Carlos, I see you raised your hand. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Muchas gracias, Pastor
Thank
Daniel.
you very much, Father Daniel. And I'm very thankful for this experience. Thank you for Daniel. We have to break these chains, these lines that are, and to talk about these stories. And I have felt like this joy to share my story. I was assaulted by someone that they came with a gun, and me and my wife, and that really changed our lives, that experience. And we have changed, we have talked to people about how God protected us. And we have worked for the church because there are a lot of missions that there's a lot of passion for people to share God's gospel, and a lot of for people that are vulnerable and doesn't have jobs, and God is doing something for these people, and we pray for you and for
Thank you.
and for the people, and we're praying even in WhatsApp and other applications. So thank you very much, Daniel, for everything that you have taught us, and I have a lot to advocate. So thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Gracias. Man, I appreciate all the feedback, and I appreciate as many of you have joined in with us today. I believe at one point we had well over 50 folks here on, which I don't know how many of them have stuck all the way through, but I just really want to thank you guys very much for taking time out of your Saturdays, time out of your weeks, your weekend, your time off, hopefully. You know, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate, you know, you guys being willing to listen to the value of how our stories can help not only inform our denomination, inspire people around the world, and help them engage with the Church of the Nazarene and help them walk into the great things and the great things that our church has to offer. I believe our church has wonderful theology. I believe our church has wonderful ministries and wonderful execution of those ministries around the world, for people to walk side by side with, to continue to be the hands and feet of change, positive change in people's lives, with the help of Christ working through them. And so sharing these stories is my way of doing that, in my role. But I believe our stories also play a big role in helping inspire those to come alongside us, and work with us to continue furthering the kingdom of God. So I appreciate you guys' time this morning. I appreciate everybody's warm wishes and all of the comments and everything. And I hope I didn't speak too fast for Alanis, but thank you to her for translating for me this morning. And I'll let Esteban close us out, but it's been wonderful to talk to you guys. I'll leave you with two things, and I'll put one in the comments here. Is that one, this is our email for Nazarene News. I put it in there. It's news, NEWS at Nazarene.org. Send story tips. I don't speak Spanish. We're finally hiring soon to be a Spanish translator for our office again. We used to have Angel, but then God decided to steal him from us and put him in the mission field in Ecuador. And so we're in the process of getting our new friend who's going to help us with both Spanish and Portuguese. But we will do our best to help facilitate that. And Esteban always helps me out too, and I have Spanish questions if I have them. So please be willing to send story tips and information there. If you want to write the story, go for it. But if you just say, hey, this cool thing happened, here's the people to talk to, I'd be happy to work it out as well. And I know Esteban will as well. So as I turn it over to him, I'll have him tell you where you can help share these stories so his communications team can help chase them down and share them from your region. And then we will, if it goes there as well, then we will end up using it most likely as well. So thanks again for the time, everybody. And God bless you all as you continue in your ministry and service to the kingdom of God.